Hello and welcome to The Stories That Brought You Here, a podcast dedicated to the people living in and around the Salish Sea. I'm your host, Chris Wakaluk, and it's my pleasure to get to sit down in one-on-one conversations with people to hear the stories that brought them to this beautiful part of the world we live in, and to also hear the stories that brought them to the point that they're at in their lives right now. This time around, I'm going to be speaking with Kathryn Calder. Now, I think many of you are going to know Kathryn as a member of the band The New Pornographers. But what a number of you may not know is that between 2019 and 2021, Kathryn was the City of Victoria's Artist in Residence. In this interview, she's going to explain the experiences that she had in that role and a number of the creative projects that she came up with for that community. As well, she will describe how she got involved in music in a very early age, which eventually led to her and two other bandmates forming the Victoria-based band Immaculate Machine. She'll talk about those early years of touring and recording, and then detail the amazing story about how an unknown family connection led to her being asked to join the band The New Pornographers in the mid-2000s, which changed her life. It's a very amazing story told by a really wonderful person. I'm really thankful that Kathryn agreed to do this interview. This is the first interview I've done on Zoom. All of them up until this point have been in person, but Kathryn, being a relatively new mother, was able to carve out some time in her schedule late in the day to do this, and it was a real treat. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, there's a lot of different ways to follow along with future episodes. You can join the Facebook page, which is The Stories That Brought You Here. I'm also on Twitter @StoriesBrought. And you can also listen on YouTube. The page name for that is The Stories That Brought You Here. All the links for those you can find in the show notes. And I'd also like to mention that this podcast is sponsored by the 2023 Trees and Transformation Calendar, made by my lovely wife, Geneva Jacobs. For a number of years now, my wife has been making colorful calendars, with each month having an original work of art relating to and representing that month. How she's described this calendar this year is be inspired throughout the year by the vitality, strength, and stability of trees as you grow, change, and evolve through another transformative year. Each month comes on its own individual sheet of paper, so you can hang 12 months at a time, as some people do on their wall, or one at a time, or 3 at a time on our fridge as we do at home. The purchase of these calendars is not just going to be able to give you the ability to know what day it is, it's also going to go to help support this podcast. So if you like what I do here and you enjoy having some beautiful art, you can go to genevajacobsart.com and purchase a calendar there. So again, that's Geneva Jacobs Art, and if you click on the word shop on that page, or the easier way to do it is through a link in the description down below. So now it's time for a little bit of music and then my interview with Kathryn Calder.
Happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, for sure. I always love to give perspective to the audience as to what is going on. So it's 8:00 at night on the first Sunday of November, which means the time change happened today, which means it's really 9:00 at night.
I know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the latest I've ever done a podcast, and how are you doing?
Me too. Actually, it is the latest, but I appreciate it because the baby is in bed and I have some time. So this is what we do as parents to make it all work.
Yeah, for sure. How was your day today so far, Anne?
It was great, actually. I had a really great day. I saw some friends last night and it just really, really had kind of a relaxing day for the most part. Just like errands and doing things. That's nothing to report that was very exciting, but a lovely, relaxing Sunday.
Yeah, that's what Sundays are for relaxing and for errands. Yes. Definitely. So what I'd love to get to in this podcast, so the audience knows, is that I really want to talk about your time as being the artist in residence for Victoria for 2 years. Mm-hmm. But we're going to take a slow road to get there. And this podcast is called The Stories That Brought You Here. And we always open up with the traditional first question of what brought you to where you are, and that is Vancouver Island. So, Kathryn, what brought you to Vancouver Island?
I was born on Vancouver Island, and my parents, my dad grew up here too, but my mom moved from Alberta to go to university, and that's where they met. And yeah, they were both teachers in Victoria. And then they had my brother and I, and we were both still here. We spent a few years in Europe when I was a kid, but other than that, I, lived in Victoria.
Okay. And were they high school teachers or university
elementary
teachers?
School teachers.
My mom was an elementary school teacher as well, too.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. Hopefully you didn't go to a school where they taught you and your brother, I hope.
We actually did when I was in Europe, but that was because it was an international school. And so we definitely did go to school where my dad taught. Yeah.
Okay. Well, how was that? How was that experience?
Well, it was hit and miss. I was actually in my dad's class when I was in grade 6, and that I wouldn't recommend. I chose it though. I chose my own torture there because I thought it would be fun to be in my dad's class and see him as a teacher.
Yeah.
Because I'd always seen him just as dad. And then it turned out it actually wasn't that great of an experience, and I shouldn't have done that.
Okay. All right. So was it just you, or did your brother have a shared experience like that?
No,
or?
My brother didn't choose to do that. No, he chose the other grade 6 teacher. Yeah. When he was in grade 6. So he had a different experience than I did.
And I just out of curiosity, because that's how I roll on this podcast, is I hear things and I think, oh, well, this is interesting. So what made your family decide to uproot from Victoria and go into Europe?
I don't know the motivation aside from it was probably somewhat of an adventurous idea. Like they were kind of, I think my dad was drawn to the idea partly because my aunt and uncle played in the orchestra in the Netherlands. And so they were already there. They were also, my uncle is also from Victoria, but him and my aunt moved to the Netherlands. And so I don't know what made my parents interested in applying for the position that my dad eventually did apply to, why, but it was a job through the Department of National Defense, and it was a civilian job, but it was through the military. And so he was a teacher at a high school in a town where there was a NATO base or a NATO something, NATO,
a building,
had offices.
Okay, let's call it offices for sure.
Let's call it offices. It might be a base. Might have been a base. There were American bases, which is where we did a lot of our shopping at the American base. We also did it in the Netherlands, in the town that we lived in, of course, because we lived in a town. But there were bases in Germany. And so my friends were kind of either living in Germany or living in the Netherlands, depending on, we were really close to the border between Germany and the Netherlands. So when I saw my best friend, she lived in Germany and it was a 15-minute drive. So it was kind of a crazy and cool experience. And so my dad, we did that for 3 years. We lived in the Netherlands, and I went to this international school for the armed forces, kids in the armed forces.
It's interesting at that time, if we are at that age and we wind up moving schools, it can be really disruptive to our personal lives. We leave friends behind, and it's a little bit of a challenge. Did you face that yourself?
I was mostly excited. I was 8, or I guess I was turning 9 when we moved. And so I was just really excited to go to Europe. I didn't even really understand what that meant, of course. Just moving to Europe, what does that mean? To an 8 or 9-year-old? I don't know. It's just words, I think, but we were moving, and our house was, getting emptied, and we were, packing up all our stuff and moving to a new country. And so it was exciting. It was an exciting time. And then, it was definitely tricky integrating into a new social circle. But at the same time, there was a built-in community there because there were other teachers like my dad who had moved from Canada. So there was a Canadian contingent that was living there and doing the same thing. And so that's where I ended up meeting some of my friends through this community that was already kind of built in for families moving. And then plus it was military families. So they're all moving around all the time. So it wasn't like I was moving to a school where the kids had been all friends for, 10 years already, or, that's not how that math works, but, 5 years. I was moving to a school where there were new kids coming and leaving, kids leaving all the time. So it was it was a mix because, of course, I was leaving my best friends behind, And when I came back, all of those friends that I'd had, we were one group when I left in grade 3. And then when I came back, everybody had been in different classes for years, and like friends were in different, I was like, oh, you are now friends, like I had to reorient myself back to my old school, that I came back to when I came back to Victoria. And, everybody had new friends, and it was, and then I made new friends. Kids do make friends, yeah.
Totally. It would be so uncomfortable if we didn't. Life would be so much harder if nobody made friends. But
yeah, thankfully, kids do make friends. Yeah, I mean, probably not everybody, but a lot of kids do. Yeah.
So, and when you returned to Victoria after that time away, were you happy to be home?
Well, it was bittersweet because I left some very good friends behind in the Netherlands who were actually from the Netherlands and were not, military. So there were a few really good friends that I had that I was very sad to leave, because now I was 11 or 12, and that's a different age than 8, But I was also excited to come home, and, I think I just roll with it.
Fair enough. And so a lot of people know you as somebody who has a career in music. And so at that age, were you developing a passion for music, or did that come before?
Music, I think it was something that I just always did and didn't think of that much about until I was a little bit older. So I was kind of a precocious youngster and young kid. And so I was in piano, and I was in choirs. And so I was singing lots and playing piano and, performing and doing recitals and all the things that come with learning to play an instrument. And so that is how I got into music, was just by my parents were both piano players, beautiful piano players. And then my aunt and uncle, like I had mentioned, they were orchestra musicians. So it's very much in the family. And so I did a lot of music as a kid, and not that seriously. I mean, I liked it, and it came naturally to me, but it was just something that I enjoyed doing. It wasn't a plan from a young age to go into music.
Was it playing piano that came naturally to you?
Yeah. Music in general. Yeah. It just sort of it's how my brain works, is how I put it. It's
Nice.
Just sort of something that makes sense to me. And it always came easily. I didn't struggle particularly with it. And I enjoyed learning. I enjoyed practicing. I enjoyed pretty much everything about it.
Lucky you. I've been trying to play the guitar for about 30 years now, and I still can't do it. So,
well, not every instrument. I just did piano and voice, really. And I'm like you on the guitar. I still am learning.
I don't know about that. I saw you play a few months ago on Pender, and it looked pretty good to me.
Thanks. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm really curious about how your musical career started to take off for you, because you talk about music coming naturally to you and you enjoying it. And then, of course, you developed a career in it. I was just wondering if you could take us through a bit of the timeline as to when it transitioned from something that was just a hobby and being fun into something that became professional for you.
Yeah. So I think that sort of a significant starting point or turning point was when I was about 16 or 17. I went to Vic High in Victoria, and they had a pretty cool program called the Vic High R&B band, the rhythm and blues band.
Okay.
And I auditioned for that as a trumpet player, which is very odd because I did play trumpet, but I realized when I got to high school for trumpet that I was in way over my head on the trumpet. The trumpet lines in those Motown songs are so high and amazing and so hard. So I immediately was like, whoa, I can't do this. I'm going to try out and be a singer. And so I joined in grade 11 this band, and I met some of my future bandmates in a band that we formed together called Immaculate Machine. And that's where I met my friends Brooke and Luke. And we started a band and we played a lot for a long time, and we put out a lot of records on our own, self-released records, and did a lot of touring around Canada and a little bit of touring like later on through the States, just out of like just sheer kind of like, let's go and do it. Our first, just to give you an example, like our first tour that we ever did, we borrowed Brooke's parents' Volkswagen van, and we started in Victoria, and we didn't have a show until Thunder Bay. And
Whoa.
so we drove all the way because nobody would book us because we had no fans. And so we camped all the way to Thunder Bay and played a show at the Apollo in Thunder Bay, which is kind of a well-known venue. I'm not sure if it's there anymore still or if it's still going, but it was, a well-known venue for kind of like touring bands. And then we played, we might have played Toronto on that tour. And like immediately when we arrived in Toronto, we met Owen Pallett from, Owen. Do you know Owen? Do you know what I mean when I say?
Is it Final Fantasy? Yeah. I remember I saw him in a great show in Regina. It stands out as a very memorable night in my life, actually. So yes, I do know Owen Pallett. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So we met Owen, and he was incredible. And we just had this experience in Toronto where we immediately arrived and had this incredible experience with like meeting like all these great people and having this like amazing show. And we decided that we needed to go back to Toronto. And so we did. Anyway, the point of that story was the very long drive between Victoria to Thunder Bay.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's a long way to go to do a show. But
yeah, we were determined. We were determined to just go. And so anyway, we built this like career for ourselves, this little, with Immaculate Machine. And there was a show that we played with the Evaporators. So do you know Nardwar? The human.
Of course, yeah.
Yes. Okay. So his punk rock band is called the Evaporators. And the bass player in the Evaporators is John Collins. And John Collins also plays in the New Pornographers and produces the New Pornographers records. And so Immaculate Machine played a gig with the Evaporators. And so I met John. And so then sidebar.
Yeah.
It's kind of a crazy story. My mother, when she was a baby, was put up for adoption. And when she was in her 40s, she found her birth mother, and her birth mother, Irene, had a family, 5 other kids since giving my mom up for adoption. And the youngest of those kids was Carl Newman from the New Pornographers. Eventually became Carl Newman from the New Pornographers. So I am Carl's niece in this kind of adoption. I'm like half niece. And so John, who's also in the New Pornographers, came up to me and said hello. And I said, do you know Carl Newman? Because I'm his niece. And the way it was so awkward when I asked, because of course he knows Carl because he's in a band with Carl.
Right.
It was like sort of ridiculous. Like, do you know Carl? You're in the New Pornographers. Do you know Carl? And he was like, well, yeah, I know Carl. And I was like, oh, well, I'm his niece. And so he met me that night, and he saw me play, and he went back to Vancouver, and, he apparently, so the story goes, I wasn't obviously there for that, but, he mentioned to Carl that he met me and that, he really liked the band and he thought I was great. And they were looking for somebody to take on singing duties while if Nico was busy for some shows. Nico Case is also in the New Pornographers, and she also has her own solo career, just for anybody who doesn't know the context. And so they were looking for somebody to fill in for Nico when Nico was busy with her solo records and solo career, which was also very successful. And so they asked me if I wanted to join the band and come and sing on the record Twin Cinema, which was in 2005. So it was a bit of a long arc and not linear, particularly all these like kind of developments that happened through just meeting people. And anyway, so I've been in the New Pornographers for a long time now.
Yeah.
Almost 20 years. Yeah.
Almost 20 years.
Yeah.
Wow. So I just want to go back to that first tour that you and your bandmates went on from Immaculate Machine. How old were the three of you when that happened?
We had just graduated, so we must have been 18.
And so
18, 19, and 20, because they were older than I was. Yeah.
Okay. And I'm always really curious about this because the difference between getting up and going and doing something like that versus not is huge. And
Yes.
and so many amazing magical things can happen if you say yes to things in life versus not. But can you remember what it was that the three of you, how you came to that decision that you were going to go and do something like that? Was it just youthful enthusiasm? Was it your personalities? Was it that you felt like that you had a strong bond between the three of you musically and you had something to offer? What do you think it was?
I don't know. I think that we all must have been, I guess we must have been fairly ambitious. We kind of grew into it. I don't know. I don't remember who had the idea. I know that Brooke, guitarist, singer, and songwriter in Immaculate Machine, like we all sang, we all played instruments, and we all wrote. But he definitely did a lot of the legwork on booking shows. He was really interested in that part of it and going on tour and yeah. So he did a lot of that work. And we were totally on board to go and do it. And I don't know how we did it. It just seemed like a good idea. And we had no expectations. And so we just went for it.
How do you look back at that time in your life right now that you're 20 plus years from that time? I would imagine you look back at that quite fondly, but I'll let you answer the question. When you reflect on those experiences, what feelings do you have about those years?
Well, I mean, I think that there was just so much camping that we did that really amuses me. You know, like there was just so many things. I think the things that I remember are the little things like going to the grocery store and buying just food for wraps all the time. We just ate so many wraps on those tours because, you know, when you're 18, 19, you don't really have a ton of money. And so you're just trying to make it all work and have gas money and go. And so you're not really eating at restaurants. You know, you're not staying in hotels. You're camping in the van. You're sleeping. I remember sleeping on the bench in the Volkswagen van, in the van on the bottom with my feet up on like the kick drum, you know, just like sleeping on the gear because there was not enough beds in a Volkswagen van for three people, but there were just enough to fit three people like in the van if one person's kind of slept on the ground. Like, you know what I mean? It was just, we were constantly doing stuff like that. And so that's mostly what I remember is it was like scrappy, you know?
Good word, scrappy. I haven't heard that word in ages. I like it. Yeah. Nice. And so those first, maybe let's say 3-4 years or so, did that continue to look the same way, what you're describing, or did things start to really kind of take off for you guys? Yeah,
we started to play. We did a lot of staying at people's houses at a certain point, and we did a lot of touring. We started having shows where people were coming to see us play. And that's a really big turning point for a band, from the feeling like you're sort of begging people to come to see you, you know, or like you've got your 5 friends that are like really like your band and want to come and hang out, you know, and support, to having people you don't know come and pay money to see you, whatever the ticket price, even if it was a small ticket price, it was still significant. And so that, yeah, like we had some really crazy shows that I remember we played a show in Halifax that was in I don't remember the space. It's a really long time ago, but I just remember the cops being called. And because I guess it was in an art space, as those art spaces are, they're in like residential neighborhoods. And there were a lot of people, like, you know, a lot of people to us, you know, like maybe 100 people in this art space, and it was overflowing onto the street, and it was loud, and we were playing, and then the police came, and it was like a dramatic and exciting kind of like show that we had. And I also remember through kind of mutual friends, not even through music, we ended up meeting some of the guys from the Constantines, who were an extremely popular band in Canada at the time, or quite a popular band. And so we were able to support them like in their show in Victoria. And that was also like we felt that was just like a huge opportunity at a venue that is no longer around, just closed actually, Logan's, if you remember.
I do know Logan's, yeah. It closed recently, eh?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. And so we opened for, the Constantines. And so we just built up from doing so much touring and going back and forth across the country a lot. And then we lived in Toronto for 6 months. We purposefully made our home base there. We were house sitting for, friends of the like one of our families. And so we had like a house that we could, with a basement that we rehearsed in. And then we would stay in Toronto and then go to Halifax and back, and Halifax and back, and Halifax and back. And we weren't in school at this point, so we were mid-20s. And so that was how we did it.
I think it's really illuminating for people to hear these stories, because I generally think that people have the impression that, oh, wow, somebody plays in a band and they're a musician and everything's pretty cruisy, but it's anything but.
It's definitely, we had a great time, and especially when you're, in your 20s. But yeah, it was challenging because, you're driving a lot, you're doing a lot of work to try and make something go. And that's always a lot of energy that you're putting into something, and that you never know if it's going to kind of work out or not. But we did have a good time, and we have some like great stories, and we were really good friends and still are.
Nice.
And made a lot of really great friends too, like in the Canadian music world. I'm still running into people who I met while Immaculate Machine was touring Canada, just from like, oh, hey, yeah, like we met a long time ago. It's been a really long time. It's nice to see you, kind of thing,
Would you call the Canadian music world a pretty small world?
Well, yeah, it is. Yeah, I would say it's small as far as once you kind of get to know people in it, it becomes very small. Yeah.
Sure. And I just want to quickly ask as well, too, about what happened with your time with the new Pornographers as well, too, because with what you described about the situation with your mom finding out that she was adopted and finding out who her birth mother was, and then the connection between her and Carl Newman, and then your obvious connection being related to your mom as her daughter. So how did that situation wind up affecting your life in terms of being asked to be part of the band, and what happened from there?
Well, I would say a substantial impact on my life. And it's interesting because, I'm in a band with my uncle, so I'm with family. And that's it's kind of a neat relationship, I think, because I spend a lot of time with Carl when we're on tour, and I wouldn't know him nearly as well if we weren't in a band together, of course, right? And when I joined the new Pornographers, they already had fans. They were already kind of taken off, had this critical acclaim in America. And so I hopped off the scrappy tour van and onto a tour bus with the new Pornographers. I went from Immaculate Machine tours, and then I went to new Pornographers tour bus, and my third gig was to 10,000 people in Prospect Park in Brooklyn. That was my third gig with the new Pornographers. So it's like really just throw you in there and here you go, and they were surprised by that too. Like that was a huge crowd for the band too at that time. So it was all very exciting for everybody. And yeah, so it was a crazy experience to be kind of flown into New York to do these shows. There was a run of about 5 dates. There was a little bit of like my trial run in June of 2005. And it was such a blur. I can barely even remember it. But again, little things stick out, like, doing karaoke in Manhattan and, like performing these shows where I was nervous because Nico wasn't there, and the band was a little nervous because Nico wasn't there. Nobody really knew whether that was going to be okay or not, but they were trying it because they wanted to tour and they wanted to get out and get the record out and tour it. And we did some shows with Nico too, but yeah, it was just kind of a wild time.
Yeah, no kidding. What you're describing actually sounds super movie worthy to me.
Yeah, like it's like like just like young girl, like put into this band and like, trial by fire.
And things obviously worked out.
And things worked out great. Yeah, things worked out great. People were really kind and supportive, and people just wanted to see the band, and they were accepting of the fact that I was there and accepted me. Like, not only did the guys in the band accept me into the band, but the fans accepted me into the band too. And so, yeah, it worked out great.
Yeah. And maybe
Nico, I'm saying the guys, but I'm also including Nico in there.
Okay. So, yeah, right. Because you were her replacement to a degree. And so, yeah, that's obviously important to get the nod from her.
Yeah.
And so
when we sing together, so we're all in the band together, when she's there, we sing together, and the roles have morphed and changed. And so, I'm not considered Nico's fill-in anymore. Do you know what I mean? Like, I have my own role in the band now. But at that time, yeah, I was like coming in as like a new person, kind of being the fill-in.
Just a question off the top of my head is that perhaps having a conversation like this, maybe 40 years from now, somebody asking you about your experiences with the new Pornographers, what event or period of time or album do you think that you'll look back on as being one of the most memorable stories that you might tell in the future to somebody who's asking questions to you like I'm doing right now?
I mean, I feel like the beginning, was particularly like the Twin Cinema and Challengers albums. Those two in particular were probably where I have the most specific memories from, because it was such an intense kind of experience. Even though at the time, and sort of goes with my personality, I was rolling with the punches and, like kind of trying to maintain it cool about it. It was certainly, there were a lot of experiences I was having for the first time, like playing on David Letterman, playing on The Late Show. So playing on like TV, and we did a lot of like interesting tours around then. We went to Mexico City, we were touring, we went to Japan. And so, yeah, like those years with the band were maybe just like because they were the first years would stand out probably.
And this whole time, have you always been based out of Victoria?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, just stayed put.
You just stayed put. What is it that you love about Victoria?
Well, I mean, it's just a really beautiful place, and all of my family and friends are here, and I love traveling, but I never felt I needed to necessarily move somewhere else. I didn't move away for school. I think there was like a few reasons why people kind of move away. Either they're like, get me the hell out of this town, which is, some people feel like that about Victoria for sure. And they take off. I never felt like that. I never felt claustrophobic or particularly stifled or anything like that in Victoria. I always felt like it was comfortable and I had enough going on, I guess. So I appreciate its beauty, and it's a very calming place to live, depending on, your circumstances, obviously. But for me, it was just like my home. And so I never felt like I needed to move anywhere else. And, when I was in my early 20s, my mom got really sick with terminal illness. And so I was looking after her. So there was no moving, like after I was kind of like 23, 24, I was like here with my mom and looking after her, helping look after her. And so I was in Victoria, and then, then I'm 27 when she passes, or maybe 28. Might have been 28. And then there was, I can't explain it other than it was like part life circumstances that kept me here, a part that I like have lots of like great community that I love here, my family and, you know, my friends. And then, yeah, part that I just love Victoria. I haven't found a place that I love more.
Fair enough. First thing I just want to say is I'm sorry about the passing of your mother. I know it was a while ago, but I think anytime we lose a parent, it's pretty crushing. So my condolences for that.
Thank you.
And getting back to talking about Victoria as well, too. And that's part of the reason why we're doing this podcast is to hear about your 2 years as the Victoria Artist in Resident. Just to let you know, a big part of the reason why I'm so curious about this is because a good friend of mine, Luke, he was the previous one.
Oh, right. Yeah. Luke Ramsey. Yeah.
Yeah. And so through Facebook and seeing posts that he made, I got to see what happened. And then being in the city as well, too, and getting to see the art that he did with murals, I was like, oh, this is really interesting. So when I found out that you were the person who took over, I was like, oh, it's not exactly the same thing. The projects that you were working on, where they're very visible in the community. And I thought, oh, this is going to be really interesting to hear her explain about what projects you did, and especially because it was during COVID. But I'll let you pick it up from here. How did that opportunity present itself to you, and what was some of the work that you did?
Well, you know, I actually heard about the Artist in Residence through Luke. I'd been following his work as Artist in Residence through, you know, social media. And when the new position came up, he actually sent me a message and was like, hey, did you know about this? You know, I think you could be really great. You should think about it. And I chatted with him a little bit about his experience and was like, okay, yeah, this seems really cool. And so I applied and got it. Like, I was like amazed, you know, and it was the committee process. You know, I went in and did a group. It was a committee, the Art and Public Places Committee. I did an interview, and they asked me a bunch of questions, and then they chose me, which was really nice. And it was such a wonderful experience. It was kind of crazy because, yeah, it was during COVID. And so, first of all, whenever you start a position like that, I think you have a lot of, like, you're kind of dreaming big anyway. You're like, okay, we could do this and we could do this and we can do this. So my mind was going like a mile a minute all day, every day, trying to figure out what I could do, you know, and I had some ideas, and then they kind of get narrowed down as you sort of start to learn about city processes and what you can do, because there are lots of sort of like public art. It's not rules. That's not the word I'm looking for, but
policy
guidelines for things they just have over the years in place, guidelines in place for public art. So things like if I wanted to do an event and it was public art, it needs to be free. You know, you can't, no tickets, you know, which makes sense, right? As public art, you can't charge for public art.
Yeah.
Right. But if you're doing a performance and anyway, it doesn't matter. This is all just a little bit too detailed, but but there were guidelines. And so I had to learn what they were and learn about how the city works and learn what the projects were. And because I was in music and performance, the way I envisioned the role was as somebody who was engaging with community, like community art was how I saw it, and doing my art in community and with community. So a lot of my projects involved performances. They involved bringing people into an experience. And because music is ephemeral like that, that was like a big part of my plan. And then COVID happened and all gatherings were not permitted.
Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun. Totally. And so I had to rethink all my plans for every project because, you know, for health and safety reasons, which is fair. And so I came up with, I was able to pivot. I had a lot of support from the folks at the city who were helping me with my project, and came up with a few different ways to deliver things that didn't involve gatherings. So that is where my projects ended up coming from. There were, at the very beginning, we had this really special project with the James Bay community school that I loved that was before COVID happened. And so we were able to get school students, grades 1 and 2, connect them with seniors at the New Horizons Center in James Bay. And they had like this little art and music afternoon where the kids would come down from the school to the New Horizons Center, and the seniors from the public who were like, you know, part of the center, or like some of the grandparents of the kids came, and or neighbors or people who knew the kids, and the kids would talk to them. They would fill in these little sheets about, you know, things about your life, things that had changed, things that stayed the same over the years. You know, what kind of food do you like? Oh, I like ice cream. And like, oh, I also like ice cream. Or I like, you know, like that kind of stuff that's like kids. And they draw these little pictures, and we did this sing along at the beginning. And it's hard to describe, but it was extremely heartwarming, this experience, because the kids were so excited to talk to these seniors, and the seniors were, of course, thrilled to be hanging out with these kids, and kids are so fun and such a great perspective. And so we had this like one project that worked out where we could be in person, and it's too bad that it got cut short, but that's how it is.
Was that project meant to be an ongoing one that would happen regularly over the 2 years?
Yeah.
Or?
Well, it was meant to be, you know, like a few of them. There was only, we might have done 3, and there was meant to be 4. And then I was taking some recordings and kind of like figuring out something that I could put together, but I hadn't really decided what that was going to be yet. It was mostly focused on the experience of the kids and the seniors together. So that we ended up with some, you know, like really cute recordings of songs by kids that I was able to use in another project. So that was the one project. And then the next project. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, well, that's frustrating. That's frustrating that COVID came along and
like
just
so
like
COVID.
Just wrecked all your plans. Jeez. Anyway, that's but the things that you did wind up doing, because you had to pivot, like you say, and had to create other opportunities. One that stands out in my mind, when I read about this one, I just loved it, and that's Be Calm.
Oh yeah.
Could you explain to people what that is? Yeah,
so Be Calm is a phone line. It was like a toll-free number. It's no longer going, but it was a toll-free number that people could call and hear and select, you know, different options from 1 through 9. You hit the number, and there were different categories of things you could hear: poetry, you could hear music, you could hear. One of them was children laughing. That one was extremely cute, and it was intended as a way of kind of gathering audio, because I'm, you know, a music person and into audio. It was a way of, I don't know, just collecting sounds and connecting community, because at that time when that came out, people were terrified of COVID. It was a terrifying time. And the reason I picked the phone line was because I felt that it could reach, you know, like seniors and people who love to use the phone. The phone is a very common, like, people know how to use the phone. Not everybody knows how to use the internet, you know, but we put it up there too on the internet, because a lot of people do know how to use the internet, and it's it's easier for some people than for others. And so, but the phone line, like, for a number of reasons, it chose the phone line. But it was just a collection of sounds, and I really wanted to make people feel better. That's all. You know, it's just like, in a time that was scary and upsetting, there was a lot going on. And I felt, okay, well, this could be a positive thing for the community, you know, if people like it, basically.
Yeah, totally. And so to have an opportunity like that, where you can just pick up the phone and have something to calm your nervous system, which is what we all really needed a lot every day, it seems like, during certain periods of time. But that was such a great idea. Another one as well too is Patched In. Multimedia looks like. I thought that looked really, really pretty with the visuals. But if you could explain to the listeners what Patched In was.
Yeah, so again, like, motivated by, there's a common thread here, I think, of like kind of trying to make something peaceful, like make a peaceful place. And so what Patched In is there's an alley in Victoria, called Limong Cow Way, and it's across the street from Chinese Public School in Victoria, and it's off of Fisgard Street, and you walk from Fisgard, you go down this little alley, and you end up in Centennial Square in Victoria, just in case anybody, knows Victoria. But it's like a little alley, and on one side there's a parkade wall, and on the other side there's a building, an office building. And so on the parkade side wall, which was city property, we did a mural, and the mural was designed by an artist friend of mine, Megan Hildebrand, who's an incredible visual artist. I told her the idea of that I wanted. Sorry, this is like, there's so many elements to this that I'm going to try and be coherent, and I apologize but if you're like, if I'm losing you, just tell me. And I'll
keep going. So
when COVID was happening in 2020, all of the traffic stopped, as we all remember. The planes stopped, and I live out by the airport, and it was noticeably extremely quiet. And so I started going outside with no idea what this was going to be used for, and recording birdsong because I could hear the birds. And I was really struck by, I hear the birds, and and they were like this beautiful sound of birds. So I had this idea that when I was like pivoting, and one of my other ideas was a sound installation, but it was a totally different idea. And so I was like, okay, well, maybe I could take the idea of the sound installation. It was going to be like a multi-speaker kind of thing. And maybe I could refocus it and base it around birdsong. So I reached out to my friend Megan, and I was like, I don't know what this project is yet. I have these birdsong recordings. There's an alley in Victoria where I could do this project. It has these beautiful magnolia trees. I think it could be something around birds and birdsong. And she came back with the idea of a mural that looks like a quilt. And so it has all these like triangles in different colors. It's extremely bright, but not like overly bright, but it's just colorful and very beautiful, and based around, like quilting, and this idea of her take on why she chose quilting was because it's kind of like art done by women that doesn't necessarily get always treated as art because it's quilting.
Yeah.
And she chose the colors to match the forest and like natural kind of habitats if we're talking about birds. So the colors are colors you would find in forest, flowers, trees, that kind of thing. It's colorful. It's a tree-lined alley, And then I had an idea to put speakers up above the mural and have it play bird song. But then I also wanted it to be a little bit, some of the issues with being an audio artist is that if you create a piece of music and you play it every day at the same time, people who use that alley for commuting or for are going to hear the same thing every day. And it's going to drive people. And I did not want that.
No,
I was very I'm aware that when you are working in a store and you hear the same song at the same time of day, you start to hate that song. You're like, oh, or you love it forever, but it can go either way. So I wanted something that was not going to always be the same song. And I wanted to do something that was my art, music composition. I wanted to add my own actual art form into it. And so I took this idea of birdsong. I looked up the local birds of the area. I found recordings of these birds, and I translated those bird songs into musical melodies.
Beautiful.
And a lot of them, I think there was something like I did sort of 50 birds. And so they are in various speakers at various times. And there's underlying kind of musical pads that pan. All of this is panning to mimic kind of bird in flight, that sort of idea. They're panning from one side of the alley to the other side of the alley on one wall in a line. And so the music moves and it's never the same. And I was trying to make it was a bit of a puzzle because if you have too many melodies, it all just starts to sound like kind of like a cacophonous same thing. So you have to have not too many melodies so that you can kind of pick out that it's changing, and not too few so that it is not interesting. So there was like a little bit of like, anyway, working that out. So, and then twinkly lights in the trees for starlight, you know, kind of like this effect of just twinkly lights are always beautiful. So
Always.
just a little extra thing.
Yeah.
And then the speakers, I just didn't want them like mounted on the wall. So they're in birdhouses, big boxes that are painted to match the mural. And then one of my favorite parts, there were a lot of favorite parts, but it was that the Victoria Chinese Public School across the street actually painted, the students painted birdhouses, wooden birdhouses, and we hung them in the trees. So when you're walking in the alley, there's the idea, it's not always playing because, again, I didn't want to, you know, make people too annoyed, but there's the colorful mural, the colorful big birdhouses with the speakers. You hear the bird song, the actual birds recordings from my backyard. And then you also hear little bird melodies and, you know, this kind of musical composition panning along the wall. And yeah, and then you're walking under these trees that have these colorful birdhouses painted by the students at the school. And if you're there at sunset, little twinkly lights.
That's awesome. And you know what I love about that is that the randomness of it, that you can show up to take a look at this, but maybe you won't hear any sound and you'll have to wait around. And I don't know, it kind of reminds me of trying to see the Northern Lights. You can attempt to see the Northern Lights, but there's no promise that you'll actually see them, right? So, but I guess if you stay around long enough, music will play, though. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, like the music is in the evenings. So if you're around in the evenings, then it should play. And also, if it's not playing, I have a composition on my Bandcamp page that I did that you could always access if you wanted to, like, kind of hear what the song sounds like. It's a 10-minute kind of like a little bit of a loop. And, you know, like took a bit of a snapshot of, you know, like here's an example of kind of what this composition sounds like. It's not panning and it's not moving in the same way, but you get the idea of the sounds and the general kind of vibe. So I do have it available. Like when you're in the alley, you can scan the little barcode, the QR code, and go to the Bandcamp page and hear the song on, you know, on your headphones or whatever, if you want to, and look at the art. So.
Well, the next time I'm in Victoria, I'm totally going to check that out. Sincerely. And actually, and if you could remind me and the listeners as well, too, where exactly is that located again?
It's off of Fisgard Street, and I can't remember the actual address, but it's the little alley. It's right across from the Chinese public school.
I'll get the address and I'll put it at
if you get the address for the Chinese public school and then just walk across the street to the alley, it's like a little alley tucked in. It's beside the parkade, between the parkade and an office building.
Okay, I will let people know at the end of the interview. I'll find out the address and I'll let them know. But that sounds beautiful. That sounds amazing. I've seen pictures of it online, but I think going to explore that and experience it in person would be amazing. And I know we don't have too much time left, but I just wanted to ask one last question about your experiences being the artist in residence, and that is, what did you learn about yourself from doing all the work that you did?
So I learned that I love community art. Like, I love being in community and doing art projects with people. I think it is really fun, and people are usually really quite game for doing things. And so I learned that I really enjoy that. And it's a part of, it's sort of, it's just something that I didn't really think about a ton until I, started looking into this role, that it's something that I love doing, and hadn't really had a lot of opportunity necessarily to do it, although I have done lots of community work in the past and have all really enjoyed it. But I didn't put two and two together as a theme. That was something that I loved. It was always part of these events that always felt really heartwarming, and they're usually community based. Like I've done work in schools with choirs before and concerts, and you know what I mean, like that kind of thing, and have always really enjoyed it. But I would say I learned that about myself and about how I view art and music, as aside from like the career part of it, I think it's so fundamental to our lives, like the experience of listening to music or like looking at art, or it's such a fundamental human experience. And so I love, kind of bringing that out in communities and being part of that.
Well, that's great. Thanks for doing that. Thanks for taking the time and the effort and the energy and the work and the enthusiasm and the creativity that you did for 2 years and providing those experiences for people. And I'm sure that there's a lot of lasting memories from all the work that you did. So thank you for doing that.
Oh, gosh. I mean, hardly a thank you. It was just like my pleasure. And I love it, turns out. Like I said.
Fantastic.
Describe, but anyway.
Well, you have such a close relationship with the city of Victoria, and having had this position that we talked about being the artist in residence, and that, do you have anything that you have on the horizon that you're working on that are going to incorporate some of the things that you learned during that time and have community involvement again?
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't have anything at the moment because I've kind of been on mat leave, and whatever that looks like for a freelance musician. But I have some tours with the band coming up in December. And so I've been focusing on that and other projects, like music projects, like my band Front Person. We released a record this year, and that had been like long awaited. We put it on hold during COVID. And so it was done years ago and, finally came out this year. But so that's mostly what I've been focusing on. And then, of course, like being a mom, but I do have things like ideas, and we'll just see like where it goes. One of the things that I did learn, or at least that I feel like I solidified my idea about, is, I really like things kind of unfolding. And so a lot of these projects started without me really having a very clear idea of what they were. I just had these little bits of ideas that I pieced together with the help of, other artists and things and my friends, just kind of like as I went along. And so there's definitely, I feel like at this point in my life, I like the idea of not totally knowing like what's next, but it will unfold as it will. And so I have lots of ideas of things that are percolating, and they're eventually going to come out in ways that I probably won't expect, and they'll turn into something, hopefully creative down the line, but I don't know what they are yet.
That's really lovely. That's a beautiful answer. I love what you said there. It's funny. So often when I do this podcast, I ask the question, how did that unfold for you? And I have to stop myself from using the word unfold because I love it so much.
Because it is. It's like this, it's like a surprise, you like, what's under this folded piece of paper? I imagine it's like origami or something, the reverse origami, where you're like unfolding it to see or something anyway. But I know unfolding. Yeah.
Exactly. And the thing is that when people like you and anybody who does this podcast say yes, like a conversation unfolds and stories unfold and a connection unfolds. And you see, I'm saying the word over and over again, but I'm so appreciative and grateful that people take the opportunity to share a bit about their lives and to be vulnerable and open enough to share that with myself and then the people who listen. So sincerely, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for sharing all the things you did. And yeah, all the best.
Thank you very much for having me on. It was a real pleasure to chat. And I'm really happy we could do this and that it worked out and the power's on. And
yeah, she's saying that because the power's been cutting out on Pender Island for numerous times over the last few days. And I'm excited that it didn't. But thank you again, Kathryn. Have a good night. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much, Chris.
All right. Well, wasn't that great? Kathryn. I loved listening to her laughter during that interview. She's got a great laugh. That was really enjoyable to listen back to for me. And I sincerely hope you enjoyed that as well. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. It really means a lot that people take time to listen to these interviews. And I truly believe that we are surrounded by so many fascinating stories because people are just that. They're fascinating. And when we take the time to be inquisitive and show some curiosity, we'll regularly be amazed at the life experiences that people have. If you're at all interested in hearing more episodes, there's a pretty extensive back catalog. And if you want to know the address for Patched In, like we talked about in the interview, it is 631 Fiskard Street, in between Douglas Street and Government Street, right in the heart of downtown Victoria. If you enjoyed what you heard, please think about sharing this interview on social media. And if you're interested in supporting this podcast, please consider purchasing a calendar by my wife, Geneva, which again, you can find a link in the description. Again, I'd like to say thank you to Kathryn, and thank you to Ben McConkey for providing the theme music for this show, and thank you for listening. Until next time.